everybody, thanks for joining me. Right now we're going to be looking at some 20s dresses. We're going to look at some of the identifying characteristics that you can use to determine if something is from the 20s, and we're also going to look at some of the construction techniques. So here we go. The first one that I want to show you, I thought this one was just so classically 1920s. This is a silk chiffon dress. It's got a really fun floral print. You'll notice there are some gathers here at the hips, some ruching, lines of visible stitching right here. As is typical for the 20s, a lot of dresses in this period really didn't have very complex construction. Now, a lot of them went wild with the trim on these very basic designs, but the actual dress designs themselves were pretty simple, and this one is no exception. So what we can see of this dress, it is a sleeveless dress. It's very, very rectangular. This one actually looks a whole lot like the Mary Brooks Picken 1 hour dress. If you guys want to look it up, it would be a really fun project. So the skirt is cut in one with the dress on this. The fun thing about this dress, the skirt is cut in one, but we needed a little extra fullness in the hips. So basically the pattern is cut like this. We have the side seam coming down, then out, then down again. And the part where it goes out is then gathered into the main body of the dress. The neckline is bound in a self fabric bias, just finishing off that edge. This obviously would have been worn with a slip. No matter what certain vintage dealers online try to tell you, this would not have been worn by itself. It has an applied trim right here, which has some really fun stitching, and we call this a picot edge. So if you look at the edge of this trim, you'll see it's got stitching, and then there is a section where it's got little extra yarns, frayed yarns sticking out. This is called a picot edge, and it was done with a special attachment. You could either send off to have your things done, or you could do it on your home sewing machine with a hem stitcher attachment. I actually have one of these at home for my great-grandmother's singer. And this is an edge finish that you'll see a lot in the 20s and the 30s. We don't really see it too much after that. So these are cut straight on the grain. They are gathered and stitched on, and they're edged on both sides with picot. We've got just a smaller ruffle on the inside, larger ruffle on the outside of this little decorative panel, which comes down in a rectangle. It's got just it's got the same trim applied around the arm and on the shoulders. And this is a fun one. Dresses in the 20s typically fasten either on the side seam with snaps or hooks and eyes, or in cases like this one, they fastened on the shoulder. We do not see zippers in this period. So this one fastens over the shoulder with snaps. So you can see, it's just to be able to make sure you can get your head through. The dresses were very straight and unfitted at the waist, which made the need for a side opening a little bit less necessary. And you'll notice the back has no opening at all. It's very, very plain, very straight. Same as the front. So typically you'll find the openings, if there are any, on 20s dresses hidden pretty well, either in the side seam or on the shoulder. This dress right here is a kind of fun one. This is sort of a transitional style from the World War I period to the 1920s. I'm not certain of the exact date of this dress. This one is an extra yarn weave, feels like a silk chiffon. And it's got kind of a pile effect. You may notice it looks a little bit like a burnout, especially where I hold it out here to the light. It's asymmetrical. It's got drape with a dropped waist. So what we see as we transition from the Edwardian period to World War I, the waistline drops some, things become quite a lot more boxy, a bit less fitted. We don't have that wasp waist sort of look anymore. And as we come out of World War I and into the early 1920s, we sort of see that box silhouette just become a little bit more streamlined and the waist drops farther. So we've got this, it's got a swag here at the hip. It's got an asymmetrical skirt. It comes down to a point, which I don't know if you can see. But it comes down to a point here on the hem, a little bit longer dress. This piece is just really remarkable. It's got this heavily rhinestoned dress ornament here I'm not sure what, if anything, was in the middle of this originally, but you can see it's got some blue stones. They feel a bit like plastic. It's brass, and then we've got some red prong set rhinestones here. This dress opens in the front. So if you look here at the bodice, you can see it's got kind of a triangular insertion here that is lace with silk chiffon over it. And that fastens to this side here with a snap. And that goes all the way down in the lining of the dress, which is China silk, also fastens with snaps. So when we're putting this one on, oh, I had that fastened incorrectly. Okay, so when we fasten this dress, here we go. We're going to match up the snaps. Oh dear, there are snaps missing. So this will fasten to the lining right here, and then this little piece just comes down over it. So I'm going to spin this a little to show you the back. The back still retains this hip line detail. It's got a ruched horizontal bit of this extra yarn weave sort of chiffon here. So the next dress I want to show you is pretty fun. This one is special. When I got it, I thought it was a 1930s dress until I was showing it in class, got it on a dress form, and noticed something very odd about it. Do you see the fabric is folded right here? That is a 1920s dress that was taken up probably in the early 30s to make an older dress look new again. And they did a sort of a homemade job of it, which is nice because it means that we've got the artifact of being able to see it. I'm going to bring the camera down where you can see this dress a little better. One thing that we start to see as the 20s go into the 30s is an increase in geometric cuts like this right here. We'll see a lot of triangles, arches, different things like that. And then it's attached to a circular ruffle here. So if we were to lay this out, it's straight on the grain here and it's curved, which gives it a little flare, a little play at the bottom, but keeps it fitted through the hips and also kind of introduces a bias cut here, if you can see as I'm stretching the fabric. It's got a deep lace ruffle. The lace is repeated here and it's attached. So the lace at the hem is repeated up here on this wide collar. This large collar is something that made an appearance in the latter part of the 20s and carried into the 30s when we're going to start to see a whole lot of sleeve emphasis that later shifts into the shoulder emphasis of the 1940s. This is a crinkle silk chiffon, beautiful pattern. And the thing I really like about the way they've attached this lace is that the lace has a scalloped edge, and they've scalloped the edge of the chiffon to follow the lace. It's both up here at the neckline and then also down here on the ruffle. Let's come in for a close-up. So you can see this shaped sort of effect that we've got with the lace here. This dress is one that has no closure. It's got a good bit of stretch because it's a crinkle chiffon, makes it easier to get on and off. You can see this sort of cape effect continues on the back. And again, we can see this waistline. This has been taken and folded up to raise the waistline to a 1930s level. And what you can see here is they've taken this up a solid 4 inches from where it originally was. If we look at this, this is about a 2-inch tuck, doubled 4 inches. Here's another one that I would like to show you. That is this cream colored one right here. So this one I would probably put late 20s. As you can see, we've got this sort of geometric cut again. As you can see, we've got this sort of geometric skirt cut, which you'll see a lot. And the way these are applied, sometimes they were quite tricky shapes. So what you'll notice is they're not stitched as a traditional seam where you've got the 2 pieces of fabric and then you just stitch them together. Instead, it's what we call a lapped seam. So if we've got our fabric here, the upper part of our skirt, the lower part of the skirt is folded under and applied and stitched on. So what you'll see is there is actually visible top stitching on this skirt. Makes it easier to handle some of these wonky shapes. We got a little bit of shattering going on here at the shoulder, which means that this does not need to be stored on a hanger. But you'll notice the seam finish peeking through here. It's got pinked seams. This is made out of silk and hand stitched here along the neckline. And we've got some dress buckles here. Dress buckles were extremely popular in the 30s, so we see a lot of those then. These are not functional buckles. They are simply stitched on for decoration. Another thing we'll see here, which started, I'd say probably started predominantly in the 20s, and then we'll see it continued on through the 40s, is this sort of ruched application that we have here in the middle of this dress. 20s dresses, when they've got sleeves, also often have quite dramatic cuffs. We'll see some of this Art Deco influence here, just as we do in the skirts. Can you see it's got a triangular insert and stitching right here. This one has belt carriers. It originally had a belt. The belt has not survived. Silk is starting to shatter right here. It's slit. And we've got a really great example of silk disintegrating from underarm sweat. Yay. This one has a side opening, very typical of the 20s and 30s. We've got snaps running down the side, and the edges of the garment are finished with a straight, not bias, tape that was cut and used to finish that off. So when you snap it, it becomes pretty invisible, folds towards the back. The last dress I want to show you is another transitional piece that I would put probably at the very late 20s, maybe very early 30s. The fabric somehow reads a little more 20s to me. I pulled this one. It's a little bit of a tricky one, and until I put it on the form, I actually was thinking earlier 20s than what it is. So this one is a fun one. It feels, I'm having a hard time determining what this one is. It could have some linen content. It could also have some silk content, but it feels a little more stable than a lot of the silk garments that I've got from this period. So what we've got here, again, we've got a very geometric treatment of the neckline. We've got a fun floral, sort of a pseudo floral print, maybe with a suggestion of houses or mountains here. So we've got some geometry kind of in here in this organic print. And we've got a purple trim that just really does a nice job of finishing off this dress. It's used as a finish on the armholes and also just outside this collar band, functioning like a sort of piping. This dress actually has a waistline seam and belt carriers right at the natural waist. And if we drop down here, you can see we've got a little more of this purple piping, and then we've got a circular ruffle down here at the bottom of the dress. So I'm still thinking late 20s because of the length of this dress. It's not really a 30s length. And we've got the same bias tape finishing off this edge. So we've got, again, the points, the very Art Deco sort of structure of the dress. Again, very simple. It does have a little bit of bust line shaping achieved by a tuck or kind of an open-ended dart that runs right here. This one has no closure. Some dresses into the 30s had no closure either. I've got a sewing book from the mid-30s that was written by a man who was at a loss to explain how women could get into their dresses with no closure when often the waist of the dress was bigger than the bust. He attributed it to magic. I'll try to find this quote and post it for you guys. We'll see if I get around to it. So we've got the same design as in the front, repeated in the back here. Since there's no closure, there's no interruption to the design, although if it did have a closure, it would be probably on the side for this period. So again, we've got the V at the neckline and on this little collar band, straight waistline. At the bottom, the dress comes up and forms, the skirt, circular ruffle comes up and forms a V here. Again, kind of keeping that sort of Art Deco vibe, even though we've got a very organic sort of print here, a very modern looking print. It's kind of fun. Now we're going to go over to the table and I'm going to show you a couple dresses that are too fragile to go on a form. It's a good example of a simple dress design that has been heavily embellished. We've got some massively Art Deco buttons going on here. These are copper plated. I think the copper is wearing off, this geometric design. And then we've got some really fun stuff going on here. So we've got a collar and disintegrating cuffs and silk. The whole dress is silk. This, you might think it's supposed to open like this. It's not. It's asymmetrical. And as you can see, there's no ornamentation on the back. These are both designed to flip over here to the left side of the dress. The gold is a gold thread that's done in chain stitch. This is, again, silk chiffon, and it's faced in silk chiffon as well. And then we've got a cording with gold that is stitched on right here. So forming some really cool interest on the collar and cuffs. The dress itself feels like a silk satin. It's got some good weight to it. You'll notice here they have bound the collar edge. We got our seam allowances here. These were covered in a bias tape formed of this same silk chiffon that is now disintegrating. So again, shattering silk. What we call this in conservation is that the material has inherent vice. It's basically destroying itself because of what it's made of. Now, this dress has a side opening. Again, we've got snaps. And this was actually, it's kind of fun. This is made with the selvage of the garment. So, the selvage of the fabric that the garment was made from. And we can see how that has been applied here to finish this opening. And when it snaps, it's pretty invisible. There is some trim right here stitched on at the waist to hide the waistline seam. And it comes down into a circular skirt, which is banded with, this is really fun, guys. So this is a silk satin or silk charmeuse, a pretty good heavy one, like I said. And they have used both sides of the silk charmeuse. I'm gonna flip this so you can see it. So they've used the shiny side on the inside here to create a matte contrast on the outside of the fabric. So it's the same fabric, it's just flipped inside out and added as an inserted band here. It's applied using the same technique that I mentioned earlier, where it's a lapped seam instead of being sewn together. So you'll notice that top stitching there, the edges were pressed under on this band, and then it was top stitched in place. The hem of the dress is a double turned hem. You could probably get a kind of a, it looks like the effect you would get from doing a chiffon hem. It's just on a heavier fabric. And you'll notice on the edges of the dress here, they used the selvage of the fabric very judiciously on the one side to keep it from fraying. And then the side that is pressed in towards the garment, you can see, is not selvage. But it's got this fantastic circular skirt with this dropped waist. Another dress that I wanted to show you that is just so 20s. It's a very, very simple design. Again, this one is made with a silk charmeuse. It's got a much drapier hand than the last one that we looked at. Still a pretty durable fabric, no real damage. And this one has a gusset here on the side that's U-shaped, and again, it's lapped and stitched. And then we've got a bias trim here on the neckline and on the arm opening. You'll also notice that the skirt is gathered and stitched here, left the gathering threads in as a decorative bit, and we've got some piping done in self fabric right here. This dress is actually black. I know it doesn't look that way here. And then we've got a nice high quality deep hem here. I'm going to guess that's a good 4 inches. And it's hand stitched. Again, you can see for this dress, they've used the entire width of the fabric for the skirt, and this is the selvage, so no need to finish seams on this. Let's look at the inside of the bodice. The inside of this dress, this is funny, I can see it better on my phone than I can on the actual thing since the phone's lightening it. Everything is finished here, except for this bit, but that's covered by the finished part. So the skirt, they've done what appears to be a straight, just a straight edge finished tape. A lot like the seam binding we can get today on the inside of the skirt. And then the side seam of the garment is bound in what seems to be self fabric. It's got quite a bit of bulk here, if you can kind of see as I pinch this. But all the edges on the inside of the dress are finished. Oh, now this is really interesting. I was actually wrong when I said that this was a gusset. Check this out. this was some kind of a reinforcement on the side seam and underarm of the dress. As you can see, this has a standard side seam on the inside, whereas on the outside it had that U-shaped piece, which is just top stitched in place. So I don't know if this was to cover some kind of damage or if it was just created that way when the dress was made as a reinforcement. The last dress I'm going to show you, and it's one of my favorites. It's currently too fragile to put on a form. I've been meaning to repair it for the past 6 years and have not gotten to it. This is something that you don't typically think of when you think of the 1920s. This is called a robe de style. And one of the designers, Paris designers in the 20s, to popularize this style was Jean Lanvin. Now, what makes this dress a robe de style is, whereas most of the 20s dresses are pretty straight and pretty fitted, this one has a gigantic full skirt on it. So we still have that characteristic 20s strapped waist, but we've got this giant full skirt. This dress is in silk taffeta with what feels like a cotton tulle down here at the bottom. And it's got some faux pearls and some glass seed beads and rhinestones. Something, we don't know what, maybe mothballs or similar, has happened to these pearls and melted them. At first, I thought perhaps they were gelatin pearls and it was water, but I pulled one of them off, dunked it in water, it did not dissolve. So it's a mystery. This dress is ornamented with a dragonfly. I think it's kind of the best thing ever, and one of these days I want to copy it. Now, this is one of the hazards of storing silk and why you need to try to keep it as flat as you can. What you can see is that the silk is starting to separate at the creases in the skirt. This dress is very, very difficult to store flat. I've just got it in a box all by itself to try to slow down the deterioration. This one, because it is a robe de style, it's got a little bit going on with the hem. You want the hem to stand out in this kind of dress. I highly recommend you look up some of Lanvin's work. But this has what you can't see, but I can feel, and I hope you can kind of see as I'm trying to squish it. There is a pretty wide, I'd say 1.5 inch horsehair braid right here stitched into the hem. And there's a good little finished edge where that ruffle is sewn on. So you see the horsehair braid is actually encased in the same silk taffeta as the dress, cut straight on the grain, and then it's hand stitched on. A very nice technique there. And the hem of the dress is turned up, providing a little bit of extra stiffness there. So we've got 2 layers of fabric here, 2 layers of fabric here, plus the horsehair to kind of keep this with some body. And the beads are actually, this dress is quite heavy. The beads on this dress weigh a good little bit, and so the horsehair and that extra fabric kind of helps keep the beads from collapsing the thing. Coming up here to the waist, you'll see again these visible gathers and a lapped seam, or maybe it's just a top stitch seam. The construction of the dragonfly is really fun. We can see some of the stitching underneath. This had all the trims applied and was then applied to the dress by hand. And we come up here to the top, and the bodice has this tulle or mesh again. We've got a taffeta self-trim binding here at the neckline and a repetition of the same bead design that is at the bottom of the dress. I want to show you the armhole. Oh, crumbs, we just lost a pearl. Throw it in the box. This dress has a really deep armhole, as you can see, and the trim goes all the way down and even tucks into the dress itself right here. The inside is coming apart badly. The inside of the dress, you can see where the trim was applied. There wasn't too much thought given to finishing that edge. This piece of fabric right here is something that I've added in an attempt to stabilize the dress because, as you can see, the mesh is coming apart because of the weight of the beads. So I started conserving this and haven't finished it yet. So this is the robe de style. There are no closures to this dress, but it's a really iconic 20s piece, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about when they think about the 20s, but now you will. I'll see you next time.